If you're entering the gardening world, you may have heard about the USDA Hardiness Zone Map. You may have heard that it's really important to know your zone before you plan your garden. You may have heard terms like 6A and 6B, and you may be wondering what all of this means. Today, we're going to break down the nuts and bolts of the USDA Hardiness Zone Map, why and when it matters, and how it may not matter that much for planning your garden. Stick around to the end. I'm going to share some crucial tips to help you make smarter planting decisions and ultimately lead you to a better harvest. The USDA Hardiness Zone Map is specific to the United States, and it's a way of breaking up the United States based on the average annual minimum temperature in a region. So if you hear the term 7A, this is a 0 to 5 degree average annual minimum temperature. 7B would be a 5 to 10 degree average annual minimum temperature. Originally, the USDA zone map started with 10-degree increments, and then it got subdivided into 5-degree increments, which is why you have 7A and 7B. And all this really tells you is the average annual minimum temperature, like I said. There are a lot of things that it doesn't tell you, like your average rainfall, the growing environment and conditions, the humidity level, how hot it gets during the summer. So because of this, it's not necessarily our best indicator for how and when to plant and what to plant in our annual vegetable gardens. It's very helpful for perennial plants, trees, and things like that. It will tell you what's going to survive in your area based on how cold it gets in your area. And again, this can be hugely beneficial, especially when we come to frost dates, because what we're also going to look at is the first and last frost dates, which kind of go hand in hand with the USDA hardiness zone map. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But the main takeaway from this is it's going to tell you that annual minimum average temperature. And again, it's more for your perennial plants than it is for your annual plants. So while USDA hardiness zones can tell you a lot about planting your perennial plants, because you can pair this information with the back of your seed packet. If you're growing a tree, like a fruit tree or something like that, the back of the seed packet will tell you this variety is hardy down to zone 5. That's going to tell you a lot about what is going to survive in your area during those winter months where it gets really, really cold. However, there are many things to consider, even when it comes to perennial plants, because you may have a cold snap that's unexpected. You may have a later cold snap that could kill your fruit trees or your plants. Things happen, things go wrong. So this is a great guide. It's a great starting point, especially when it comes to the perennial plants. It's not so great when it comes to your annual vegetables, however. What's going to be more effective when it comes to planning your annual garden is going to be knowing your first and last frost dates. Compare this information with the back of your seed packet information and determine when to plant your seeds. So if, let's say, your last frost date is in April, toward the end of April, and you are starting your seeds indoors, and it says on the back of your seed packet, start these 6 weeks before your last frost date, that's going to give you a lot of information about when to start those seeds inside. It's also going to tell you when to direct sow. So if you have, again, back to your last frost date, if your last frost date is in April and you want to direct sow your seeds directly into your garden, this is going to tell you that you need to plant them after that last frost date, because that's the beginning of your growing season. On the other side of that, the first frost date in fall is going to tell you when your plants are probably going to die. So by knowing this information, you're going to be able to say, okay, I have tomatoes growing. I know that in October, which is my first frost date, my tomatoes are probably going to die because I'm probably going to get frost. You can plan your planting times based on this information, especially when you're succession sowing. If you want to succession sow your tomato plant, you want to make sure you're getting a harvest before that first frost date in the fall. But going back to what that USDA hardiness zone doesn't tell you is it doesn't tell you all the different factors when it comes to your growing environment. So I'm in Florida. I'm in a zone 10A. There are folks out in California who are also in a zone 10A. However, we have very different growing conditions. I experience a lot of humidity, whereas they may experience a lot more drier conditions. I have a lot more rainy days than they do, and they have a lot more drought issues than I do. So because of that, knowing that information is going to help me make smarter planting decisions for my specific growing area. A really good resource to help you plan your garden is going to be your local nurseries. So it's their job to know what grows well in your area, to know when to start things in your area. And they're going to be a great resource to help you figure out exactly what to plant and when to plant it. You can also use ag extension agencies. Your local ag extension agency is going to have a lot of information, again, about what varieties grow well, for some growing tips about your specific region to combat some of the things you deal with. Like for me, humidity is a huge issue. So my local ag extension agency would be able to tell me more about how to grow in my humid environment than the USDA growing zones would tell me. Another key point about growing zones is although the average annual minimum temperature is what is recorded, it can vary in your area. So let's say you live at the base of a hill and you have neighbors that live on top of the hill. Your growing zone may be different than your neighbors on top of the hill because you live at the base of the hill. So you're going to have differences in wind and cold and things like that that can actually change your USDA growing zone. So while it's a good guide, it's not definitive. You may think that you're in a zone 8A, but you may really be in a zone 8B because of the things that I just mentioned. Also living near bodies of water can influence the growing zone that you're in. If you live really close to the water, somebody a couple of blocks from you that's further away from the water is going to have a different growing zone possibly than you do. So the key takeaway here is that knowing your USDA growing zone is a very good starting point, but it doesn't tell you everything you need to know. There are many other factors to consider when it comes to planting your garden. Next, I'm going to talk about that crucial tip that I mentioned in the beginning that's going to help you be a more successful grower. It's going to help you make smarter planting decisions, and it's going to help you understand your specific growing environment even more. And that really important tip is understanding your microclimate. So in my yard specifically, I have multiple microclimates. These are different growing conditions within the same yard. Where I'm at right now is a very shady location in my backyard. It's surrounded by 2 walls. During the winter, this is going to provide some wind protection for my growing plants. However, the area here is very, very shady. This makes this a very different growing environment from where my raised beds are, where it's very sunny and there's full sun exposure. So knowing that this environment is different, I would be able to plan and plant based on this specific condition within my backyard. And this is my raised bed garden. And here I get full sun most of the day. So this is another different microclimate in my yard and a different space to plant in, different growing conditions than that shady wall that I was just showing you. Also, with the addition of the raised bed, the soil level is a little bit higher. This area gets warmer a bit sooner in the spring season. So because of this, I can actually plant a little bit earlier in this space. Again, a different microclimate. And this is another microclimate in my yard. This is my shed, but it's a south-facing wall. And so because of that, there's a lot of wind protection for my little plants. Again, meaning I could start my seeds a little bit earlier in this space, meaning that they might grow a little bit longer into the season. Now, I live in Florida, so I actually don't have an end to the growing season. I actually don't have frost dates, not really. But even still, if I were in a colder place, this would be a very good area if I wanted to extend my growing season and grow a little bit longer because this south-facing wall would provide a lot of protection for my growing plants. Something else you can do is actually create microclimates within your yard. So just like I was talking about that south-facing wall, being able to plant in that would be creating a microclimate in your yard. Another option would be adding season extension like row covers or frost blankets. You can do this to get your plants a little bit further into the growing season, like getting them past that first frost date and extending your season by a little bit. If you live in a somewhat temperate climate, you may actually be able to grow all winter long with a little bit of added protection. Like I said, from row covers or frost blankets, adding a heavy, thick layer of mulch. And you might even be able to grow through the entire season, depending on where you're at. Something like a 7A, 7B, maybe 7B, 8A, 8B. You might even be able to grow throughout the whole winter just by creating a microclimate in your yard, adding a raised bed, adding that thick layer of mulch, adding some frost protection. And there are a lot of things you could even grow during the winter. So microclimates are really, really important when it comes to planting your garden. And there's a lot of information to know. And there's a lot of things to dive into when it comes to microclimates. We could get really nerdy talking about it. But if you're just starting out, I think the best practice would be paying attention to the microclimates in your specific yard, in your specific area, getting a feel for what your temperatures are like. And then as you plant and as you grow things, you're going to learn a lot more about what thrives in your specific area. And a lot of times this is very individual. So even though your ag extension agency, your local nurseries can give you a lot of valuable information, they could be a great guide. You may find that you can grow things in your specific microclimate that other people around you cannot grow. You may find that there are things that don't do as well in your microclimate. based on your growing conditions. So take into consideration your microclimate, take into consideration your USDA hardiness zones, and take into consideration your first and last frost dates. Put all of that together, and that's going to give you the best growing experience possible. And it takes time. Don't worry about it. Your very first season, get out there, start planting, figure out what works, do some experimenting, and don't get hung up if things die. It's going to be okay. Thank you guys so much for watching this video today. If you found value in it, leave me a comment down below. Hit that like and subscribe button. Let me know what you're growing this year. Let me know about the different microclimates in your area or in your yard. And definitely subscribe for more beginner-friendly gardening tips. We're going to be talking about beginner gardening this entire growing season. I'm going to leave a video on the screen for you to check out until the next video comes out. Thank you guys so much for watching. May your garden be full of grace and may you be abundantly blessed. We'll see you next time.